Hello there. I'm Ruth Chambers, and this is the Chambers Street Theater, but don't think for a second that I run the whole thing. Today, we have all the big guns out. We've got 3 people in the control room, bless their hearts, and of course you already saw one of our first special effects with all that snow and the mining camp and the nice sounds. And that's Alex Silva Satter. He's in charge of all of that and making that happen. And with him is Ashley Hamlin, bless her heart. She's just a bright light. And today we have a third person. The crew keeps getting bigger. This is Una Cho, and we're so pleased that she's here. She'll be on sound today. So when I get too loud or too soft or we need a sound cue, she'll be right there. Today is our Christmas holiday show, winter holidays. We've been doing holiday shows. We did a Halloween show, we did a Thanksgiving show, and now we're doing a Christmas show. It takes a lot of work to get all these special effects and everything lined up. And I want to thank everybody. We used to be a little triumvirate of 3 people, and now I'm not quite sure what 4 people are called, but I guess it's a poker game with 4 people at a table doing the best they can. And I want to thank everyone, and of course, Davis Community Television that works out of Davis Access Media. We're right here on 5th Street in Davis. Well, today we're reading the Christmas Pudding. I hope you're ready. It's from chapter 12 from my book, The Weight of Gold. And of course, as soon as I wrote a book, I realized all the things I didn't include. And so I started at writing a lot more, filling up the things that needed to be filled up. And there will be an expanded 2nd edition, probably on Kindle. And that will be The Weight of Gold, the expanded 2nd edition. Right now, the 1st edition is not in print, so we have to wait for Kindle, and we're looking forward to it. Well, let's get started with the Christmas Pudding. Of course, it's a gold rush story, and it takes place up in the hills in the winter, and you're seeing a mining town. There are some wood cabins, there are some tents, and that was pretty typical of the gold rush era in all the different places. There was the Yukon, Australia, and of course, our 1849 gold rush in California. Well, here we get started. The Christmas Pudding story starts in a mining camp up in the hills. Maybe Slapjack Bar, or Red Dog Camp, or Sucker Flat, or even You Bet. By the time the Christmas Pudding story got to me, all the mining camps were claiming it as their Christmas pudding story. Even French Gulch claimed it. Do the French have a Christmas pudding? So let's know the background of a Christmas pudding. It could be Welsh, or English, or Scottish, or even Irish, but definitely British Isles, and usually English. French is ridiculous. But the pudding in our story is from a California mining camp, and that we know. Let's just say it was Red Dog Camp. On a cold and rainy night, Ben Witt was sitting in his tent and counting sacks of beans. He had plenty of beans and even one sack used as a pillow at night. And a very good pillow it was. How he missed his mother's cooking. Most of all, he missed her Christmas pudding. More than the pudding itself was the experience of the pudding. The dining room lights are low. Everyone is quiet. The kitchen door opens and this mountain of a pudding on a fancy tray enters the room. There's a glow from the pudding, for it is covered in flickering flames. The alcohol in the brandy is burning, but not the pudding. It's a strange and reverent sight, the flame that does not burn. Someone says, "Oh," and another says, "Oh," and my, the wonderful aroma of the Christmas pudding. The flame warming the dried fruit, and brandy releasing holiday magic to last all year in every nostril's memory. It's mostly dried fruit and brandy, but there's enough gummy, moist cake to hold the pudding together, and suet too. Butter is used in a fruit cake, but suet is used in a pudding. The shape is important. It has to hold together and be a half dome, although that does vary. Christmas Eve is the time for the pudding. It should be night, not only because it should be night, but so that Mother had all day to push a few coins in the pudding, followed in secret by Grandmother, then Auntie Prue, and finally Sister. The pudding eater to find the most valuable coin will have the best luck all year. So here was Ben Witt with his sacks of beans, and it's already September. One must start a Christmas pudding in September. The pudding has to season in the brandy. The brandy preserves the mixture and gives it a dark color. Ah, the Christmas pudding. There Ben Witt sat with his sacks of beans and no flour. Could cooked beans pass as flour cake? Surprisingly, Ben had dried apples, apricots, and raisins. That's a good start. With enough dried fruit and brandy, maybe the cooked beans holding the pudding together wouldn't be noticed. Ben had brandy, a preferred alcohol. He also had whiskey and rum. A man alone will often keep company with a bottle. A liquid friend is good to see after a day's work when there's no one else to welcome him home. But of the various drinks to keep a man company, brandy is best for a Christmas pudding. Ben opened the bean sack and got out a goodly quantity of beans for soaking overnight. It's good to soak beans overnight before cooking them. And so Ben started his pudding. Since it was still raining in the morning, Ben cooked the beans inside his tent. Was it the odor of food cooking or the smell of dried fruit? We cannot say. But before long, other miners dropped by and stuck their heads in Ben's tent. "What's going on?" was one comment. "Cooking something?" was another. With each visitor, Ben replied he was starting the Christmas pudding. Soon miners were returning with dried fruit and even some brandy. One man had cherries, another had pears, and a third man had dried strawberries. But no flour was to be seen. Soon the ingredients for the Christmas pudding were in a pile and looked quite attractive. Ben just needed something to hold the dried fruit together, and the cooked beans it would be. Ben mashed the beans to just the right paste. He then poured the golden brandy over the mashed beans and gave it a few stirs. With enough brandy, even mashed beans could be flour cake. Then, just because, he dribbled some brandy over the dried fruit pile. Surely the brandy would save this Christmas pudding. Ben carefully scooped the cooked and mashed legumes over the dried fruit. With a little pressure from his hands, Ben pressed the legume paste into the fruit. Yes, it looked right. Yes, it smelled right. Best not to ask for more. Well, maybe another dose of brandy. Yes, brandy will heal this pudding. The just a bit bigger than a half dome was taking shape and holding. Washed coins of all denominations were pressed into the pudding. We must not forget, the person with the highest denomination found will have luck all year. Ben had saved the dried cherries and now placed them on top in a circular pattern, much like a target. The biggest cherry was in the center, with the other cherries graduating down in size to the smallest cherries on the outside. When the last adjustment of cherries was done, there was agreement from all heads peeking in the tent fly. One of the peaked heads said, maybe a little more brandy. Yes, agreed the other heads. Ben poured more brandy over the pudding until there was a shallow wading pool in the 2-foot-wide pan used for gold panning. Now the placing of the cloths over the mixture, the steaming of the pudding that goes on for hours, and then the setting aside of the pudding until Christmas Eve. Granted, there might be more peaks and even some additional brandy, but the pudding was cooking in its own way and smelling just right. The weeks passed, and the stories of the Christmas pudding passed from one mining camp to another, as stories will. Soon puddings were being assembled at many mining sites, depending on what was available. There was a primarily whiskey pudding with piñon nut accents, and even a mostly ham pudding with rum. The creativity could not be stopped. But Red Dog Camp knew they had the best and closest to a home-style Christmas pudding. The wiser men of Red Dog Camp were the men who had spent the previous winter in the Gold Hills. This year the wise men agreed to have more than a tent and had spent some time building a community cabin for sharing during the bad weather. This community cabin could also be an eating hall and meeting place as well. The wood structure sat on a stone foundation and had the luxury of a wood floor. There was a fireplace for cooking at the far end of the cabin. The first-year miners who thought a tent was good enough soon came to the cabin for shelter. Since they had done no work on the construction, each additional man had to pay for a space in the cabin and was given, after payment, his own place in the bunk beds lining the 2 opposing cabin walls. The survivors of the first year knew there would be men seeking shelter. Often there's more gold in business than in mining. Soon the blessed night drew near. Ben unwrapped the brandy-reeking pudding and admired his work of art. All the men of Red Dog Camp gathered in the community cabin and sat around what passed for a table. 4 barrels with planks of wood on top. There were barrels for stools and even some real chairs. All were silent as the pudding worshippers waited. Outside, Ben lit the pudding with his best cigar, and up went the flames, covering the whole pudding. Cherries became translucent. All was perfect. Ben cleared his throat and the cabin door was open. He walked into the cabin and there were ohs and ahs as Ben placed the pudding on the table. Not a sound was made as the alcohol in the brandy burned. In time, the flame lowered. That was the cue for Ben to take out his Bowie knife for the first cut. There were small wood planks waiting for the pudding slices. "Where's the custard sauce?" The odd silence turned to doubt and confusion. "There's no custard sauce." Ben stood stunned. How could he forget the custard sauce? "There's no custard sauce," was said again. Yes, it was true. There was no custard sauce. "Well, if I'm not the darn fool my father said I was all Ben could say. "Sorry, boys. I'm just a flappin' fool." Tom Flowers stood up. "Now, you ain't no fool, Ben. You're the one who thought up this here fine touch, a home we all left behind, and a finer puddin' has never been seen." Suddenly, the cabin door flung open, mostly by the wind, but standing there was a snow-covered man. Flowers was the first to speak. "Well, come in, man, and close the door. We're all cold enough, and who are you?" "Name's Nathaniel Hopkins, and I've heard of your Christmas puddin'. Hiked a day and a half to see this puddin'." Ben spoke up. "The flame's gone out, and we've no custard. I'd pay gold to see that puddin' in flames. We've got brandy to light it again, but we still ain't got no custard. So then you'd need 3 or 4 eggs, sugar, maybe salt, milk, and if memory serves, and it does, there needs to be a goodly dash of vanilla. Nutmeg would be a nice touch, too." "Are you the devil, Mr. Hopkins? I told you we have no custard, and now you tease us with what we need to make what we don't have." "Gentlemen, I am not the devil, and I mean no discomfort to you. I only came to see the puddin' all aflame. I sat in a tent, watching the rain too long, and thought your puddin' would be a pretty sight on this night." With that, Hopkins reached inside his coat. As he did so, several men pushed back their chairs and stood reaching for their guns. Gentlemen, I mean no harm. Sit down, sit down." With that said, Hopkins pulled his right hand out of his coat like a magician. He had 3 eggs between his 4 fingers. Then his left hand went inside his coat, and out came 3 more eggs between his fingers. All the men smiled and awed. 6 eggs were before their eyes. No man present other than Hopkins had seen an egg since Sacramento City. And so we have eggs. May I assume you have sugar? I do, said the miner named Seth Simmons. And salt? Yes, I have salt, said Ben too, since Ben Witt was the first Ben in camp. Then that leaves milk. There was no answer. I thought not. Hopkins reached inside his coat again, and out came a glass bottle usually used for ale. Milk. So now all we need is vanilla and nutmeg. All the way from Philadelphia town is this small bottle of vanilla I've carried from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast to remind me of home. With that said, Hopkins placed the vanilla bottle on the table, and beside the bottle from the same hand came a nutmeg seed. And now there is custard. Hopkins took 2 pans used for gold panning that were leaning against a bunk. He placed 5 fist-sized rocks from his pocket in one pan with water, then placed the second pan on top, making a double boiler. The ingredients were mixed and poured in the second top pan as the improvised double boiler sat in the fireplace. Ben came over to watch. You certainly came prepared. I said I was sitting in a tent watching the rain. The pudding story I heard said nothing about custard. It was a guess. And either way, whether you had or did not have custard, I thought a trip would be better than sitting in a tent watching the rain. Come now, men, let's get that brandy out. We need to light up that pudding again. Taking the cue from Ben, men ran to their tents as Ben inspected his pudding. He was certain it could take a flame again. Luck was on a run tonight. Soon Ben had the brandy he needed for the pudding, and so he set to work. Men returned to their places around the table. When Hopkins said the custard was ready, Ben went outside the cabin through the wood door with leather strap hinges. The door was shut, and Ben set the flame with his cigar again. At Ben's word, the door was opened, and Ben walked into the cabin a second time. The pudding looked beautiful. Some men cried. Handkerchiefs were taken out and used. Finally, Dan Dungood stood. This is the night a wee baby came into this world, a wee baby held by a dear, gentle lady, a wife and child in good health together, with a protecting father near to make the family complete. All the sweet sounds and sights of a family on this blessed night. Now, you know I care about each and every one of you and keep you in my prayers. But tonight, blessings go to all the sweet babies. It is their new world beginning. May each one of these wee babies have a loving and caring mother and father to prepare them for life's purpose. May each blessed baby be loved. A good family is life's sweet gift. Bless all families. Bless all the new babies starting on their way. Bless mothers and fathers everywhere. And bless a room full of wandering sons far from home, wee babies grown to full height. Amen. I say amen. With that, Dan Dungood sat down. All were silent as they thought of families somewhere. Tom muttered, "Bless the babies." The pudding was cut. The custard was poured, and the men consumed the Christmas pudding. And so, Christmas Eve in Red Dog Camp came to a close.